What is the definition of literal? And then why don't you like it?
No, well, actually, the actual definition of literal, it means that which is close to the text. That's what literal means. That's why the word literal is in relationship to the word literature, is
Right,
because
right.
literal means close to the text. It means the text itself, you could say. But what people usually mean by literal is something like a factuality without meaning, and that doesn't exist. There's no such thing. I don't think so. There's no such thing as facts without any type of meaning.
I wouldn't say that the way that people use the word literal means devoid of meaning or uninterpreted or something like that. I think it stands in contrast with metaphor.
So what people usually mean by literal is something that can be measured, right? And that has a certain weight and density, something like that.
Yeah, so what's useful for me would be to come up with two statements, one that's literal and one that's metaphorical. So if I was to say water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius under standard atmospheric pressure, okay, that's a literal statement. Her attitude froze me over. That's metaphoric.
Uh-huh. Um, it's interesting. It's like it's so interesting because the idea like that the idea that naming the temperature of something, which is especially that, which is like an arbitrary scale of measurement, of changes in
Sure.
temperature, uh, and that is, I would say that has a function, but that function is very rare. You very rarely encounter that function. Usually, most people would be like, it freezes when it's cold. That's pretty functional. But like it freezes at this very specific like temperature. It's useful in the laboratory. It's useful if you're like, I don't know, if you're trying to freeze a certain element in order to do a certain experiment, but that's almost never the case. Like almost no one deals with that level of reality. Am I wrong? Like that almost no one ever deals with that level of reality?
Okay, the point is that I'm trying to put out onto the table statements that one can classify as literal and then metaphoric. And sure, we can say that there's some gradation, that there's
Th-
some
th- I-
degree.
there's some degree. No, I would say that there are some purposes which are more related to that which can be measured, that which is related to, you know, weight and density and embodiment in the sense of like physical things that you bump your toe against, and things that I mean, these things are more, how can I say that they're more
Concrete?
grounded. They're
Okay.
lower on the scale of being. Maybe you could understand. Um,
Like, okay, look, how about this? He typed in a password onto his computer versus he unlocked her heart with kindness. So the former is literal. He typed in a password into his computer versus I unlocked her heart with kindness.
which is that it's hilarious that you think that one's literal. It's like, let's say. I mean, I don't know. We're gonna get caught up in a bunch of stuff. So it's like if you would have said, right, he inserted the key in the padlock and unlocked that would have been way closer to typing a password on your computer. The idea that we think that is unlocking is at the same level of metaphor or whatever you want to call it as unlocking someone's heart. Because you are not unlocking anything when you type a password in your computer. Not at the sense if you want to bring it down to like the most like measurable, embodied uh ground on which we base our language. Like you're not going to find it there.
I get it. Let me try again.
And even the freezing one, like think about it in two ways. Like think
Jonathan,
about it in two
come
ways.
on.
Wait, sorry.
You you have to like it sounds like are you not able to see the difference but if
I
there
do
is
see
no
the
difference.
difference. I do see the difference. Obviously I see the difference, but I would say to be, first of all, to be cautious that you think that you've grasped things like in a way that is absolutely, how can I say this? Like the idea that you can completely avoid what you call metaphorical language even in the most literal thing that you can imagine is completely impossible. There's absolutely no way. I mean, John Vervaeke does a great job at breaking this down, where metaphor is embedded in every single level of engagement that we have, like what you call metaphor, which is this capacity to see analogies between different levels of being, is there everywhere. You can't get around it. And so I would say once again, like it's to purpose. Like the best way to understand it is to purpose. So if I use the word unlock and I'm unlocking a door, it's a perfectly useful term to manifest the unlocking of the door. If I use the word unlock to unlock my computer, which is absolutely different, which has nothing to do with opening a door that has, like, I don't know, gold behind it that I have to make sure that nobody can, like, push their way into. The idea that I want to stop people from getting into my computer, it's a perfect analogy. And then saying that I want to unlock someone's heart is a perfect analogy. But the idea that one of them is more real, I don't think that that's
I'm not even making a statement
yeah.
about
I
realness.
say one of them is more embodied, the one where I'm trying to stop someone from, like, breaking down my door and stealing my stuff. And then the next one, which is I'm trying to stop someone from entering into my system and getting my information. That's already like way that's at the same level as unlocking someone's heart. Like really, in terms of like levels of uh disembodiment, you could say something like that. I don't know. I
Okay,
mean,
I think this is going to be fun because we're both at the limits of our energy currently. So let's just have some
yeah,
fun.
we're just gonna start to get slapped, like silly.
Okay, so one of the symptoms of being autistic is that you mistake what's metaphorical for what's literal. So there's that joke like, "Is your fridge running?" Yes. Well, you better run after it. Haha. So the autistic person wouldn't get that. Or if you were to say that the well, anyhow.
And the autistic person is grounded in the most measurable, let's say, immediate tendency. They can't see analogies. Is that what you're suggesting? Or they struggle to see analogies?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that the presence of not understanding metaphor or analogies in the same way that we do, just taking them all as quote unquote literal, the fact that that's a symptom of autism or a particular type of autism and it's one of many symptoms, et cetera, whatever. The fact that that's there implies there is a distinction between what's literal and metaphorical. I'm just trying to understand if you see the distinction between literal and metaphorical. If there was no distinction, that wouldn't even be a criteria for autism. And we wouldn't have to make unambiguous language in legal contracts like
Yeah, I see what no, I understand what you mean. I think that there are definitely people who have more capacity to understand the structural reason for the analogies that we use, and that is definitely the case, and some people have very great capacity to see the structural reason for analogies. Now, it is normal that as we talk about things that are less embodied, right, that are more purely spiritual in the sense that they are patterns that inform other patterns, that we will be using more and more of we'll be using analogies more and more. That is in some ways kind of that is a necessity. Uh, and so I understand what you mean, and I think obviously I'm playing with you to some extent. I think that there's a sense in which the 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 idea that the language that we use, almost all of it connects with the bodily experience, takes that as a ground,
yeah.
and then builds analogies up into the world of meaning. I think that that's what language is, right? Because that's what language does. That's because, and also even the fact that we have language is already that. It's the noticing of of a phenomenon, naming, and then those names they're patterned in this scaffolding of analogies. Um, and so but the problem is that you can't really get totally to the bottom of that. Like you can't not get to a place where with language, you are only pointing to purely physical measurable phenomena. You cannot, because that's not what language is. The best thing you could do would be point at it maybe, or like hold it in your hand in front of someone.
I agree. I see what you're
right?
saying.
And say,
Actually, Noam Chomsky also agreed. So if you were to say something like the car moved at 100 kilometers an hour down the highway, that's an extremely specific statement. He would say that that's a scientific statement, but Noam said that most of language, the majority, the vast majority of language, isn't scientific.
so there you go. So already you're using different language. Scientific is not literal in the way that people think. Scientific is a very specific type of language, which is there to be able to capture reproducible patterns of phenomena, right? That's what scientific language is there for. It's there to be able to notice, to measure, and to communicate patterns of phenomena that can be measured and can be shown to, if I understand the measure, I can reapply the measure in a way that will show that it reproduces based on what I've observed. But that is very different from, like, people mistake scientific, like, language, which has a very that specific purpose, with what they say literal, which is something like that which is most fundamentally true at the lower level. But that which is most fundamentally true at the lower level is more like a phenomenal experience. It's more like the experience of the sun on your face, like the experience of the wind in your hair. Like that is the more grounded than scientific language, right?
Yes,
The
I
the the
understand. Yeah.
sense of distance, like the idea of above and below, right? The pain that you feel when you knock yourself against something. That is the ground more than scientific language. Scientific language is way abstracted. It is like super abstracted towards very, very tight and specific purposes, which is the capacity to predict reproducible phenomena.
Okay, let me see if I
Uh,
got you correct. So, for instance, we think of light as being a part of the visible electromagnetic spectrum, but that phrase alone, that came about hundreds and hundreds of years or thousands of years after we coined the word light or had whatever's the etymological root of the word light.
yeah.
And light initially is just some impression that you feel on your in your eyes or the difference
Yeah,
between
more
that
it's
and
more than that. It's
darkness.
like is what makes you see.
Sure.
That's what light is,
Okay. Okay. And then
right?
later on, do we abstract away and get something scientific? And same with you can use the word mother. Mother would just initially mean your that specific person. It's not something that gives birth to something else. You don't even have that concept when you're 2 years old or 3 years old.
Yeah, and then you kind of abstract into like the idea of light as being as the way you described it is perfect because it doesn't mean that either of them is false. Like obviously the scientific description is absolutely accurate. It's not. I'm not questioning science at all, but it's not the ground.